Thanksgiving had always been my mother's favorite holiday. She liked the control of it, the guest list, the seating, the way the table looked perfect even if the people around it weren't. That year, the house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, and something sharp beneath it all, like unspoken resentment. I arrived early, as usual. I always did. She said it showed respect, though I suspected she just liked reminding me I still needed her approval. I helped in the kitchen, passed dishes, stayed out of the way. By the time everyone arrived, I was already tired. The dining room filled with noise, laughter, small talk, the clatter of plates. My cousins talked about promotions and new cars. Someone asked me how work was going. I answered honestly. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I was learning. I was proud of myself for surviving on my own. My mother listened in silence, carving the turkey with calm precision. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Don't get too comfortable," she said, her voice light, almost amused. "You'll inherit nothing." The words landed heavier than the serving spoon hitting porcelain. The room went still. No one laughed, no one defended me. My stepfather stared at his plate. My aunt suddenly found the gravy fascinating. I waited for my mother to smile, to say she was joking, but her face remained perfectly composed. "I've already made arrangements," she continued, finally glancing at me. "I believe in rewarding effort, responsibility, not entitlement. Entitlement, as if being her child was a crime." I felt 12 years old again, standing in the hallway outside her bedroom, waiting to be forgiven for something I never understood. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry. Crying had never softened her. I nodded, because nodding was safer than speaking. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Conversations resumed, plates were passed, I barely tasted the food. Every bite felt like swallowing proof that I didn't belong at that table. When it was time to leave, my mother handed me a plastic container of leftovers without meeting my eyes. "Don't take it personally," she said, already turning away, "but betrayal always feels personal when it comes from blood." I sat in my car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, chest aching with all the things I hadn't said. The house behind me glowed warm and full while I sat alone in the dark. That night, I made myself a quiet promise. If I was being written out of the future she imagined, I would find my own ending, and make sure it was one she could never erase. After Thanksgiving, silence settled between my mother and me like a ceasefire neither of us planned to break. She didn't call. I didn't reach out. For the first time in my life, the absence of her voice felt less like punishment and more like space. I poured myself into work. Long hours, late nights, the kind of exhaustion that leaves no room for overthinking. It was easier to focus on tasks than on memories, on the way her words had sliced through me so effortlessly. "You'll inherit nothing." She'd said it like a fact, not a choice. 3 months passed before the call came. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar and I'd learned to distrust surprises, but something made me answer. The man on the other end introduced himself as a lawyer. His voice was careful, professional, as if he were stepping through a room filled with breakable things. He asked me a question so unexpected it stole my breath. "Are you the biological grandchild of Samuel Hart?" "My grandfather." I hadn't heard his name spoken out loud in years. He died quietly, years back, while my mother handled everything. The funeral had been small, controlled. I'd been told there was nothing left to discuss. "Yes," I said, my voice barely steady. "I am." There was a pause, then a slow exhale. "Thank you. That clarifies things." He explained that my grandfather had established a trust long before his death. A private one, structured carefully, intentionally. It wasn't mentioned in the will my mother had overseen. She contested it, the lawyer said gently, but the trust was airtight. My hands were shaking now. The lawyer sent me documents, and then the letter. It was written in my grandfather's familiar, slanted handwriting. The kind that leaned forward like it was always in a hurry to tell the truth. "If you are reading this," it began, "then my daughter has done what she always does, decided what others deserve." I read it twice, then a third time. He wrote about watching me grow up quietly, about noticing how I learned not to ask for too much, about knowing his daughter would never forgive softness in others. "This isn't about money," the letter said. "It's about choice. I choose you. Tears slipped down my face, uninvited and unstoppable. The lawyer told me there would be a formal meeting in December. All parties present, everything disclosed. When the call ended, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, heart pounding. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I was holding something far more dangerous. The truth. The law office smelled like coffee and polished wood, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Glass walls lined the conference room, transparent but distant, as if privacy were something you had to earn. I arrived early, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. I wasn't nervous. I was braced. My mother arrived 10 minutes later. She walked in with the same confidence she carried everywhere, shoulders back, chin lifted, certain the world would move aside for her. When she saw me, her step faltered just enough to notice. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply, lowering her voice as if I were the embarrassment. "I was invited," I said. That was all. She frowned, clearly displeased, and took her seat across from me. She didn't look at me again. Instead, she smiled at the lawyer when he entered, the smile she reserved for people she assumed were on her side. The lawyer introduced himself, shuffled papers, and got straight to the point. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "This meeting concerns the Samuel Hart Family Trust." My mother's expression barely changed. She crossed her arms, relaxed. The lawyer spoke calmly, efficiently. He explained dates, clauses, signatures. He described how the trust had been created independently of the will, how it named a single beneficiary. I watched my mother's confidence begin to crack. Not all at once, but in small, human ways. A tightening jaw, a blink held a second too long. "That's not possible," she interrupted. "I handled my father's estate." "Yes," the lawyer said evenly. "You handle the will, not the trust." Silence settled over the room. He continued. "Your father anticipated this dispute. The trust explicitly excludes you as a beneficiary." Her chair scraped softly as she shifted. "Then who?" The lawyer turned to me. 90 seconds, he said, almost apologetically. "That's all it takes to read the letter." He slid a single page across the table. My mother picked it up, her hand steady at first. Then she read the opening line. I watched her face change, as if someone were gently turning down the lights. Color drained, her mouth parted, but no sound came out. This isn't fair," she said finally. The lawyer folded his hands. "Fairness isn't the legal standard." I spoke then, my voice quiet but clear. "You told me I'd inherit nothing." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like the child she'd dismissed had stood up without permission. "I didn't think," she began. "I know," I said. When the meeting ended, she remained seated, staring at the letter as if it might rewrite itself. I stood, thanked the lawyer, and walked out. For once, I didn't look back. The weeks after the meeting passed without drama, which surprised me more than anything else. I had expected confrontation, accusations, maybe even tears. Instead, there was only silence, heavy, thoughtful, and unfamiliar. For once, my mother didn't rush to control the narrative. She couldn't. The trust settled into my life gradually. Numbers on paper, signatures, meetings that felt oddly unreal, but the real inheritance wasn't financial. It was the sudden lightness in my chest, the absence of a fear I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. I slept better, I stood straighter. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. My mother called a month later. Her name on my phone made my stomach tighten out of habit, but I answered anyway. I didn't know, she said after a long pause. No greeting, no apology yet. Just that sentence, fragile and defensive at the same time. "I know," I replied. She told me the letter had shaken her, that she felt betrayed. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't point it out. She spoke like someone mourning a version of herself she could no longer protect. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. "I believe you," I said, and I did. That didn't make it hurt less. There was a moment where she could have apologized, where she could have said, "I'm sorry for making you feel small." She didn't. Some people only know how to survive by standing above others. We ended the call politely, distantly. Life moved forward. I moved into a better apartment. I invested in my education. I built something that belonged to me alone, no permission required. On the next Thanksgiving, I wasn't at her table. I cooked for friends instead, burned the rolls, laughed too loud. Let the room get messy, no speeches. No hierarchy, just warmth. At some point, I realized I hadn't thought about revenge in weeks, because the truth is, the victory wasn't watching my mother lose. It was discovering I had never needed her approval to win. She had told me I would inherit nothing. What she gave me instead, unintentionally, was freedom, and that was worth more than anything she could have taken away.